Okay, thanks. All right, let's call the meeting to order. Make a roll call. Carolyn Campbell.
Here.
Okay, John Collins is absent. Carl Kaminsky.
Present.
Larry Smith.
Here.
Tracy Van Bergen.
Here.
Jim Kearns, I'm here. Keelan is here.
Yep.
Ross is here. Chris is here and Abigail's here. So we're missing Spring Grove and Huntley, it looks like. Don't have either of you here? Okay. All right. Do I have a motion for the minutes approval? Last meeting, Carl Kaminsky moves.
Second.
Larry Smith seconds. Anybody have any comments on it? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Member comments. Well, I'm glad that you were all able to attend this morning, and we moved this meeting a couple times to accommodate people and everything with spring break, I guess, started this action. So I hope you enjoyed your spring break. Action items. The first item, community recertification.
So what I have in front of you guys is the current list of recertification. So this is a 5-year process, as mentioned last time. We kind of went through this last time. The list is not changing. The only change that is happening is the Village of Lakemore, for their McHenry County side, has requested to receive certification. And that's something that I've been working with them over the past 5 years closely with. So they are in a good position. I do support that for them. So that's the only change that would be happening from the previous recertification that we had.
You know, before I should ask, do I have to have a motion to accept these, to approve these?
I think you do, because of the language in the SMO. It does require MCSC to certify every 5 years the communities.
Okay.
And so they basically have an application for that recertification process.
So let's before we go any further, then, is there a motion to approve these?
I'll make that.
Chris moves, Carl seconds. Okay, and I guess I can do this. There's no money involved, so I can just do this. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
I do have a question about it, though.
Go ahead.
These communities that are non-certified, is there a reason for that? They're not certified, or are they just not getting around to doing it, or?
They're just smaller, Larry. They don't really have the budgets. You know, it's 1 or 2 staff members wearing multiple village hats. So either they don't have the expertise, or they have to bring someone on to be able to carry out the review for the stormwater. So they just elect to keep it with us.
Okay, well, Richmond's considerably bigger than Hebron, and Hebron's certified.
I don't disagree, but as I understand it, Carla Thomas, who's their village clerk, basically wears multiple hats. The sheriff signs off on roadway components, so it's just, you know, their decision they used to be certified, but I think it is a budgetary component on their end that they feel that they can't carry that consultant that they did for however many years.
Okay, so it isn't something where they don't want to be, it's just that they don't want to follow through and do the proper paperwork or whatever?
It could be a number of different reasons on their end, and I think the major factor to consider is financial. And I'll give you a quick example. Holiday Hills a couple of years ago became certified, and when they did, they hired a consultant, and compared to what our permitting fees were, their permitting fees then at that point almost doubled or tripled, and so they reverted back to using us. So, you know, that was a decision that they made at that time. But every community has their own reasons. But yeah, I think ultimately they probably would prefer that if they had the resources to make it happen.
Okay, thanks.
Carolyn.
Just so for Algonquin being in Kane and McHenry, so how does that work? Are they fully certified through Kane or?
Yeah, good question. I didn't go over that. We have an IGA with Kane and Lake. So any of our straddle communities, if they would prefer us or Kane or Lake, they can do that. I think Lakemore and I want to say Prairie Grove. Prairie Grove is kind of an exception where they've decided the McHenry County side, they want to follow McHenry County ordinance. The Lake County side, they want to follow Lake County ordinance. But the IGA is meant to make it easier for them to just have one ordinance for those communities. So as part of their process, they are presenting their paperwork to me that they're still certified with those other counties.
And being newer to this, so indulge me a little bit,
Sure.
so if somebody can be a non-certified community and just have us do it through the permit fee process, what's the advantage of being a certified community?
It's just, you know, that's I don't know if any of the municipal sides, but I would imagine it's just a service providing for just one in-house area that you have to go to. Sometimes when residents have to come from those non-certifieds to us, it creates sometimes that communication or opportunity just for some errors. So I would imagine that's probably
one-point service. You know, when you have a developer or a resident, it's not, you got to go to the county to get the stormwater permit. You got to go to the building department to get the building permit. It's just one point of service, and then it's easier, at least I find, to coordinate projects internally among city staff when we're managing the stormwater ordinance, we're managing, you know, the building codes and development and that nature. You can kind of ensure that, you know, the communication is there. It's not that the communication with the county is poor at all. It's just, it's all right there. You know, if there's a question, you can pull somebody from staff in rather than, I don't know about that, call the county. So it's just more convenient for the customer.
Okay, you know, I just realized something, and before I move on to the next one, we didn't have any public comment this morning.
We do have Matt and Dan, but they are part of their wetland restoration fund request. So
Okay.
if you wanted to have them come up and speak.
All right, so we're going to cover you on the next one then.
Yes,
All
yes.
right. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss you, that you
Sorry, I
wanted to
didn't see
speak.
this.
I'm sorry about that, guys. Okay, so 5.2, I would need a motion on 5.2. The wetland restoration fund. Carl moves, Carolyn seconds. Okay, now we can discuss it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if you want an introduction by the Thielen Group, or I can just kind of run through it and you guys can decide if you want.
If you guys want to speak and participate, I'm okay with that.
All right, well, maybe if you have questions, we can bring them up.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So I included for you, so this is actually a site that's fully incorporated into Lakemore. So they are part of these discussions as well and on board. But I included a map just showing all the different areas in blue on that aerial for you. And then also a secondary map of the green and the red. So they actually, as part of their current permitting for stormwater, they're in for a stormwater permit, so they're looking to cover all these green areas under this particular stormwater permit. There is one portion within their site that's kind of in the middle, and that's included in their C2.3 site plan, which is the last one there. You'll see there's a wetland impact of 0.45 acres and a wetland impact, or an exempted wetland. So that wetland one impact, that was analyzed by their wetland specialist. And essentially it was deemed to basically be of low quality. Our wetland consultant with the SWCD also reviewed and approved the mitigation. So this would be a request for purchasing of the wetland credits to the amount of $42,000 into our wetland restoration fund for that 0.52 acre wetland impact. And then there's a little bit of background discussion there, and we do have Vince Mosca here who did a lot of that analysis, so I'd probably turn it over to him if there are any kind of specific questions in terms of the wetlands in that location. But it's really that straightforward, so.
And that 45,000 comes from the 2010?
Correct, yes, so.
Because we haven't adopted the new one yet.
Right, and their application came in under the old standards, so we didn't think it fair to
No,
try to swing one on them, so, yeah, so yes, that is correct.
Carolyn?
Looking at the calculation of the number of acres required, it's a mitigation ratio of 1.5 to 1. So I might not be doing the math right, but how do we get from 0.45 acres to 0.525?
Under the ordinance, the first tenth of an acre of impact doesn't require mitigation. So 0.1, over 0.1 acres of impact, that's a mitigation threshold, then you need to do mitigation.
So it's 0.35.
Yes, so you
Times
subtract
1.5.
a tenth off of the original acreage, and then you multiply that number by 1.5.
Got it.
So your math was correct.
I was like, I think I've got this right.
Any questions?
Thank you.
All right, anybody else? All right, since this involves funds, I'll do a roll call vote on this one. Let's see here. Carolyn Campbell,
Yes.
Carl Kaminsky.
Yes.
Larry Smith,
Yes.
Tracy Van Bergen,
Yes.
Keelan Owen,
Yes.
Abigail Wildry,
Yes.
Ross, I'm not gonna try to say your name, Ross, I always screw that up. Ross,
Yes.
okay, and Chris?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll vote yes. That's finished, thank you, guys. Okay, 5.3. Or 5.3, discussion consideration of approval of the updated wetland restoration fund. Do I have a
Yes,
motion for that?
Move.
Larry Smith moves, Carl seconds, okay, we can discuss.
so that's why we put it after, to avoid confusion of adoption and then the difference. So, if it's gonna be helpful, I think Scott can kind of run through the points for you guys. I think we kind of went over this, but as a refresher, I think it'd be helpful to kind of run through everything if you guys want. So Scott, why don't you?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I'm just gonna kind of go over the changes real quick, and just let me know if you want me to elaborate on anything. Opening up, we expanded, just to kind of clarify how the Wetland Restoration Fund works, and it's the Wetland Restoration Fund must help McHenry County achieve its goal of no net loss of wetland acreage. So our goal is to have no net loss of wetlands in the county. Providing wetland mitigation alternatives in watersheds where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers does not have an approved wetland mitigation bank. So right now there are 2 banks that are open in the county, but they have no credits available. And as soon as credits come up, the McHenry County Division of Transportation is going to be acquiring those. The only alternative would be, for mitigation, would be a wetland restoration fund. So that's just clarifying that point. Maintaining or enhancing natural systems that reduce flood damage, help improve water quality, including surface and groundwater, and provide healthy habitat for indigenous wildlife. The next section talks about the establishment of 3 wetland restoration funds. So,
Could I ask a question there?
Sure.
Before we go too much further? So when they purchase wetland and we don't have any available in the county, where do they go?
well, so if they don't, if there is an impact that requires mitigation, the first option, if there are credits available in a bank, would be to go pay into that bank. If there are no bank credits available, then the only option for mitigation is to purchase wetland mitigation credits. Or they could actually, if they want to create their own wetland, they could do their own mitigation. But typically a developer or another entity impacting wetland, they're not in the business of creating wetlands. So usually they want to be able to pay into, make a payment and not have to ever be responsible. If they create their own mitigation, they are on the hook for designing the mitigation, implementing the mitigation, and verifying it over a 5-year period. that they've met the conditions. So there's a big commitment involved in mitigating wetland yourself.
There's a hierarchy too, where, you know, you can look at the feasibility of trying to mitigate on your own site. It's very difficult, so that list is in the SMO that kind of helps guide you through that, and ultimately, as Scott mentioned, you're probably gonna land on a mitigation bank or into the fund.
So I've asked this question in transportation before because there's none to buy right now. We're buying up everything we can. And so I've asked, why doesn't the county obtain some land, or not the county or whoever, why don't we figure out a way to take some of these peat bogs or different things that aren't being farmed, but they're not considered, they're being farmed, and consider them to revert those to wetlands for our own bank, because we're paying so much money for these wetlands, this mitigation.
We could look at doing that. That's something that we've been approached by consultants. We just don't have the staff or the expertise to be able to certify our own wetland bank. So that would be an endeavor where we can certainly provide some structure and a process for that. But I think it would be, hiring additional staff to focus on that component, or enter into some kind of agreement with an entity that can do that for us.
So the Conservation District is, they're one of the banks that's open right now, and they just have to meet the hydrology requirements of the Army Corps of Engineers, and then additional credits will open up. And then they are building a bank in the Kishwaukee River watershed as well. Historically, the private sector has been pretty active creating banks, and so if there is a demand, I would anticipate additional banks coming up. I do know that I think there are 2 wetland mitigation banks that are being in various stages of development by private sector entities.
Do you know how many acres those all entail?
I don't offhand, but typically with a wetland mitigation bank, you're talking big acres. It's not cost effective to do it on a small scale, and that's actually why our preferred hierarchy for mitigation is actually a bank, because at that large scale, the likelihood that wetland is actually going to function like a wetland and provide the benefits to us is much better at a greater scale than if you're doing it at a small scale.
Okay.
So typically banks are, I would say, minimum 20 to 100 acres. Yes.
Our ultimate goal is to have wetlands. Why is it so difficult to create it? Are private properties, I guess, included in these banks? If I'm a private property owner and I have some wetlands on my property, is that something that can be put in?
So what wetland mitigation is you're creating wetland where it doesn't exist now. And it's, you're basically having to recreate it from scratch. The wetlands that we have in place now, developed over thousands of years. And so you can't just flip a switch and have a high functioning wetland. That's, the laws of mechanics don't allow that. So there is a lot that goes into it. Part of the challenge is also the amount of invasive species that we have. So to restore a wetland, you're not only putting the hydrology, soils, and vegetation back, you're also having to battle all these invasive species, particularly during the first 5 years of establishment. So, there is a lot that goes into it. You have to design the hydrology, which requires engineering. So a lot does go into it. It's not flipping a switch. And if it's not done right, then you don't get all those functions. So there has to be kind of a scientific methodology that you're following. And, like one of the people that were just here, that's what they do for, as a business. So, people know how to do this. But to build a bank, you not only have to do it right, you have to be able to verify it. So like the challenge that the Conservation District is facing right now is they were establishing this during a prolonged drought. And so you have to have wetland vegetation, you have to have wetland soils, and you have to have wetland hydrology. So that wetland hydrology in the middle of a drought has been a challenge. So that's kind of slowed down their ability to get approval from the Army Corps of Engineers and open up the rest of the credits. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into what goes into the bank.
Yes, so as far as private property, how do any wetlands come into play on private property? And if I have a wetland on my property, is there an incentive? I mean, obviously I can't destroy it, but I mean, is there any?
You wouldn't be able to like lease it for someone else's use to satisfy their mitigation requirements. It would have to be either an expansion of that or creation of additional wetlands. In some cases, there's different categories to this from a technical perspective on how these wetlands are classified. So sometimes more of a restoration might be appropriate if the opportunity's there. I think that there's a lot of variables with the weather, the feasibility of these different locations on being able to actually sustain and promote a healthy wetland area. I certainly am not going to pretend to be an expert on it, but yeah, in some of the situations we've seen with just some of the solar fields, you know, trying to establish that, they're fighting a lot of weeds from just the foul nature of the fields before they actually go in there. And that's kind of what we're seeing. The drought didn't help. And so even in situations where you do have folks that know what they're doing with long-term maintenance and all of that, it is difficult. And I think that's where a lot of the private industry probably recognizes that. The risk of how much money you put into the susceptibility of it failing is fairly high, and the effort required to do that as well. So
it would be very challenging for a private property owner to create a wetland mitigation bank. You know, it would require a special incentive, and then it would have to be put into some type of conservation easement in perpetuity.
Are wetlands on private property in part of the bank, I guess is my ultimate question.
Well, so most banks are privately owned.
So I think the question is, because it's an existing wetland, even though it's on private property, it still counts. So like, you couldn't even on your own property, if you had to do a building, you wouldn't be able to fill it in because it's a wetland. We can't lose wetlands. So the fact that you have it on your property, it's counted.
If I had a wetland on my property and I wanted to build,
you would have to.
Is that my?
Yeah, there's nothing from stopping you in doing that. You would just have to look at your mitigation options at that point. And if you did have.
Is that my wetland, I guess,
well,
to use for mitigation?
No. So when we're talking about mitigation, we're creating wetlands where none exists. So if you have a wetland on your property, that's not something that would qualify for wetland mitigation. We're trying, you know, a wetland is being filled here, and so we're building a wetland where it doesn't exist. The conditions are right for it to exist, and it probably did in the past. When they're looking for properties, that's what they're looking for, is where those conditions had existed in the past, and that way you can restore the hydrology.
Why couldn't they expand it?
What's that?
Why couldn't they expand it?
Well, so that's what, you know, if you could do something like that, but for a private property owner, the economic motivation isn't there. For a private bank, a company that is actually operating as a bank, they're building this to last forever. For a private property owner, how is that private property owner going to verify that that thing is going to meet the requirements of recreating a wetland and be protected in perpetuity? It can be done, but you need a highly motivated private property owner whose motivation was to create wetland on their property. And certainly, like with the Land Conservancy here in McHenry County, conservation, Citizens for Conservation in the Barrington area, you do have some property owners that would be motivated to do something like that. But then to have it tied up where you have to verify year after year that it's meeting those conditions, it would be daunting for a private property owner. an individual private property owner as opposed to a
It
commercial.
doesn't make sense to me why it has to be so difficult, but I mean, I understand that it's not an easy task, but.
It's certainly, you know, it's just mechanics. You know, we know how to do this, but, you know, the goal is to restore wetland functions in perpetuity. And your average property owner, that's not their motivation, so why would they put up the capital and take the risk of building this and not, if they don't want to maintain it in perpetuity?
I think honestly, I think anybody doing this, whether it's a company or the conservation district or a land conservancy, they have that obligation. So I think anybody could take this on and then fail to do their job, not even just a private property owner. So it's more that they just have to make sure that you're just not setting something up and then letting it go. And, you know.
That's very true. We also have to think about that the wetlands aren't potentially the most suitable soils for septic, for construction, foundations, footings, things of that nature. So a lot of the times when we're approached with this situation on private properties, they're just looking to kind of get a drive through an area, which normally is being less than that 1/10 of an acre. And in most cases, we're able to avoid it. And from that perspective, they're also not looking to build right there. They're looking to build on kind of the high spot. You know, they want a basement or, things like that. You're going to usually encounter a higher groundwater table. So from that perspective, the suitability of a site in terms of what you're trying to put out there, wetland areas don't tend to be the best as well. So your cost of construction are probably going to increase because now you really have to prep that area. You have to bring in clay, you have to get the compaction. You're just not going to get that with a lot of the organics.
Okay, we should move on.
Okay, all right.
We kind of got into this, I apologize.
So, that's okay. So we, under the original Wetland Restoration Fund, we had 2 watersheds in the county. Basically, the west side of the county flows to the Kishwaukee River. The east side flows to the Fox River. So we are creating 3 wetland restoration funds. So one for the Nipperstein Creek watershed, one for the Fox River watershed, and one for the Kishwaukee River watershed. And the reason for doing that is that allows for the lost benefits in an area to be restored as close to the area of impact as possible. Nipperstein Creek is just a very logical, distinct boundary. And so this really makes a lot more sense than having just 2 in the county. So that's the...
Now, with the potential developments down by 23, which is in the Coon Creek area, you cover that under the Kishwaukee River correctly?
Yes.
That's correct, because there's a potential ton of development going to be in wetlands over there.
Well, and so we'll get into the next map where we do actually kind of break out the main watersheds. But we'll have 3 wetland restoration funds, so that's, if there's an impact in that watershed, then the people that pay into the wetland restoration fund, the funds will be assigned to one of those 3 watersheds.
Okay.
But we'll get into where we break it down. So if impacts are occurring in Coon Creek, say, they'll be paying a certain amount for impacting that area. We'll get to that in a second. So we have, like I said, the 3 wetland restoration fund boundaries. And we just, part of what we're doing there is we're using the U.S. Geological Survey's hydrologic unit codes to tie it to that. Those are kind of the official boundaries for watersheds. And it's important to reference that for funding purposes, if grants were going to be pursued or anything like that. Next item, payment to the Wetland Restoration Fund may only be used to mitigate impacts to isolated waters in McHenry County. 1, after applicants have demonstrated avoidance minimization of wetland impacts in accordance with the Stormwater Management Ordinance, have been properly employed by their project. And this is important because that's consistent with the stormwater management ordinance. And so that this has to be, there has to be continuity between this and the stormwater management ordinance.
So you're gonna discuss the red line crossout then, right after that?
Yeah, yes. The next item is to qualify if there are no credits available from Army Corps of Engineers approved wetland mitigation bank within the same watershed, Nipperson Creek, Fox River, Kishwaukee River watersheds as noted above. And then we struck out the section below because that's referring to specific wetland banks. And none of these banks that are identified here are actually in operation anymore. And those are going to fluctuate over time. So there's just no reason to reference them in this document. If either there are or there aren't credits available, we really don't need to identify what banks are available in 2025.
So just as long as it goes into, say, if it's down in that Coon Creek area, as long as that goes to the Kishwaukee, it doesn't have to go to one of these.
Yeah, and all we're striking out is the specific references to specific banks. So in 2025, there's going to be a different matrix of banks than there is in 2027. So there's just no reason to shorten the lifespan of this document by referencing banks that may or may not be around.
Item 2 just basically replaces it by us saying that
Yeah.
if there's Army Corps wetland banks, if we list them, then we have to constantly kind of keep up with them, and if they're not available, cross them out, strike them out. So.
And
Larry, you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. My arm back. Just trying to stretch.
And then we go down to calculation of fee in lieu mitigation fees. Just referencing that they're separate in lieu fee structure based on the different prime watersheds in the county, or principal watersheds in the county. And we aren't setting these to match any existing banks, because banks will determine what they're charging based on a variety of factors we have no control over. We want to be near what the banks would be charging, so that there is integrity between those, but we don't want to match any private bank just because their bank structure or fee structure is going to be variable, and we have no control over it. So that's all that's saying there. Then we go down to where we talk about dispersal of funds and the establishment of a technical advisory committee. We'll establish a wetland restoration fund subcommittee. And part of our responsibility as a TAC subcommittee will be for wetland restoration, to make an annual call for projects for wetland restoration funds that have accumulated a minimum balance of $75,000. And we do provide off-ramps, so if certain things aren't being met, it provides you with flexibility to make modifications. So this next item is if a wetland restoration fund has a minimum balance that remains below $75,000 for more than 5 years, the McHenry County Stormwater Committee can opt to combine funds in 2 or more wetland restoration funds to make a public call for projects in their respective watersheds. So if the North Branch of Nipperson Creek has $25,000 in it for more than 5 years, you can opt to combine the funds in that fund with Nipperson Creek and combine it with Fox River, so that, if Fox River has $50,000 and Nipperson Creek has $25,000, that can meet $75,000, and we can then put it out for a project. So does that make sense? Yes?
Now I got a question.
Go ahead.
It does make sense. What are the balances of some of these funds, and how long they've been there?
So currently we're sitting at about, I think it's around $12,000, give or take, that it's been there for now, probably since 2018, around 2018. Obviously, we just had the one before you guys for the 40, so we would be around 52, 55. So we'd still be below that threshold of that 75. till obviously,
Has it been that
5
long
years.
ago, 2018, that we dispersed
I
those
think it'd
funds?
be-
I thought we just
well-
did something a few years back.
at least from my records, I don't know if that's when the projects are dated, 2 projects from 2017 and 2018. I don't know when they were finalized, they could have been finalized, a little bit later, from that perspective, but those are the dates that I have, for 2 projects, based on all the information that I have at hand. We haven't dug through the financial books to kind of track that, to confirm a lot of it, but at least from the record keeping that I
Okay, for
have.
time-wise, Pam Altoff and was on this commission at that time. So that would have been, I believe, her first year she was elected, so that would give you a time date, I believe. Because we end up and gave those funds to the Conservation District up in Hebron. And then there was a second project someplace else.
The first one was Stern Sten in Crystal Lake.
Right,
And
that
then the
was the
second
other
one was awarded to the Conservation District up by Hebron.
So that would give us a timeline, because when you get starting off here, we've been under 50,000 or 75,000 for so many years. Okay.
It's just providing flexibility. You don't have to vote to do that, but that's something we can discuss. Ideally, you actually want to have big chunks of money because you want the projects would be most successful at a larger scale. So we don't have to, and we'll talk about this in a second, we don't have to approve something or send something out for a project at $75,000. If we're having lots of activity and things are building up, we may want to postpone that to get a higher amount. But if we have funds that are sitting stagnant for extended periods of time, we want to have the ability to recoup the losses to the wetlands. So this is just providing you with greater flexibility depending on a variety of circumstances. We are anticipating growth to build up again, but if we have $25,000 stuck in a watershed that's just not building out, it's just providing you greater flexibility. Because we didn't want a document that hamstrung us, and didn't provide that flexibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and I think it's good to have that option, and I think as the district opens up some of their banks, people won't need to come to us as often,
That's
so
true.
there's kind of this kind of cycle you get into anyway, so.
That's a great point.
So we'll see what happens
And this is
over
just, like I said, we're trying to create a document that that will help us meet what we're shooting for while providing flexibility and not unnecessarily locking us in. I struck out maintain a list of projects. That was one of the things that was told to the for the TAC to do. The TAC really doesn't have the ability to chase projects throughout the county and do any type of proactive planning for sites. So it's never been acted on in the 10+ years that it's been the WRF has been in place, and so it's just an unnecessary task that's been put in there. So I just struck that out. So the project schedule and timing, and this kind of builds on what I was just talking about. At their discretion, the McHenry County Stormwater Committee, they approve the allocation of monies in the WRF accounts on suitable projects after a WRF account has a balance exceeding $75,000. And once again, you don't have to send it out for bid at $75,000, but you have the ability to. So once again, if you've got $80,000 that's been in an account for 5 years and we're just not having development, you guys can elect to send it out for project proposals. If we are, accruing more and more wetland mitigation funds, we may very well want to wait until it reaches $150,000 before releasing that. But this just gives you the flexibility based on conditions at the time. If a wetland restoration fund has a minimum balance that remains below $75,000 for more than 5 years, the MCSC may elect to combine funds in 2 or more wetland restoration funds and make a public call for comments in their respective watersheds. So reiterating what we've talked about before. And another off-ramp here is if a wetland restoration fund account has maintained a balance exceeding $75,000 for over 5 years and no suitable project has been identified in that 5-year time period, the McHenry County Stormwater Committee may elect to A, donate the funds directly to a conservation organization whose primary purpose includes creating, restoring, or protecting wetland habitat in McHenry County. This may include the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge, Friends of Hackmatack, the McHenry County Conservation District, the Land Conservancy of McHenry County, or similar organization with a proven track record of wetland creation, enhancement, or protection. Or B, make funds available to a fund, make the funds available to fund a nature-based project identified in an IEPA-approved watershed-based plan that are designed to provide ecosystem services consistent with wetlands, such as water quality treatment, flood mitigation, or wildlife habitat. So once again, these are providing off-ramps. If we have a chunk of money and we've put out for bid and we just don't get any projects that are viable, you have 2 options there to disperse the funds in ways that will provide the ecosystem services or the benefits, wetland benefits within the county.
This is something that is new, and item number B specifically would parlay into the watershed planning that we're looking to do and partner with other communities. So that list of projects that would be generated from our watershed planning, that's kind of where we were trying to draw the connection. Obviously, if there's other municipalities that also have their own watershed planning, we didn't want to, we wanted to open it up if, depending on, the availability of projects and have a lot of options at your disposal.
An example of this is, so when you do a watershed plan, a big part of that watershed plan is identifying projects within the boundary of that watershed. And Algonquin has been exceptional at utilizing their watershed plans and their projects identified in those plans to acquire funds to implement them. And so they've done stream restoration, which includes wetland restoration all along the stream corridor to dramatic effect. When they have a 6-inch storm now, they don't sweat it because that restoration that they've done is absorbing all that water. And they have these projects identified in their plans, including dollar amounts. And so that's the type of thing, if Woodstock, McHenry, Algonquin has these types of projects identified in a watershed-based plan that can demonstrate very clearly that they would be replacing wetland functions, that would be a viable alternative if you have funds that you want to disperse. And there are no viable projects through a wetland restoration fund. So hopefully that makes sense.
Larry?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. That's a private organization, and but I'm not familiar with the Friends of the Hackmatack.
So they
same sort of thing, or
similar type of thing, but it's specific to Hackmatack. So Hackmatack is a proposed national wildlife refuge, and the Friends of Hackmatack will do fundraising and serve as a fiscal agent for the acquisition of properties within the Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. So their goal is to restore habitat. So that's why they were included in that list. You would want to be giving that to an organization whose mission is to create wetland and protect it in perpetuity. And that in perpetuity is important because our goal is no net loss of wetlands. And so it can't be something that doesn't have that long-term protection. Okay. So that's why those particular organizations were identified, because they do have track records demonstrated where they can clearly demonstrate that that's part of their function. And and once again, you're not required to do anything of this, but this is providing an off-ramp options in case the wetland restoration fund's not functioning as it was intended because there's not enough money coming in or any other reason.
Larry, I threw the map up on the screen for Hackmatack.
yeah, I'm familiar with that. I just didn't realize that there was an organization that was put together for that.
Yeah, I think they were partially responsible for the acquisition of land to the north of Glacial Park.
Okay.
So it would be supporting a cause like this, essentially, to you know. And there could be other examples. Again, the list that we have here is by no means complete, and obviously over the next 10 years, 15 years, we can see a lot of movement in that field. So it's just as an example.
We have the right to give money to these private organizations.
If you wanted to, yeah. We just felt that the old structure was very like, hey, you can only use the money for a project. And then the question becomes, well, what if you don't have the money? What if the projects don't meet the certain criteria? They're just, people aren't coming in with them. And, you know, this money is just sitting there for a long period of time.
I understand the purpose. I guess
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the state's attorney's point of view on it, whether we have the legal right to do that.
Well, I guess that's a good question. We can get
In terms of, like,
clarification
private versus-
on that.
Private versus
Yeah.
conservation district.
And this was, Friends of Pagmatech actually, they spent like 10 or 13 years actually being instrumental in bringing the National Wildlife Refuge here in the first place. So all their projects do go back into federal land or, you know, refuge, so.
There's probably a lot of legal
But there's
connections
clear-
there.
I'm not saying it's wrong.
Yeah,
I didn't know if we had the right to do it.
Yeah, obviously.
Well, it's going to go before the state's attorney for.
And I think obviously if there's a request and you guys want to make a consideration for something that's not on the list before we give any money out, we would clear that to make sure we have the ability legally
Okay.
to do that.
So if the committee approves this today, it moves on to the state's attorney before it moves any further?
Well, I was not planning on moving it to the state's attorney, but I don't know what their opinion of just specifically saying giving money to, let's say, a private organization would be. But I feel like in that, there's probably some kind of legal means that can be developed for a vehicle to be able to disperse that money, right? I just don't know all the ins and outs of that. And I feel like if every organization is probably gonna be a little bit different from that perspective. And, you know, to try to vet all of them, we can get some feedback on that for you guys if you want before it's approved, or that could be part of the process when you guys are making that consideration, because it's in here, you have that right, you're taking all of those facts into account. And so one of those would obviously be the feasibility of someone coming in and asking for that money, and you know, we're unfamiliar with them, there would be that vetting process to make sure we could do that. And I think that's where probably we want to do it instead of trying to
Each
put something
organization is
in
going to be a little different, so.
Well, and these are all the
at that time,
organizations.
Go to the state's attorney's office.
That's my feeling on it.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, I wasn't hearing properly here. All these organizations are the ones that currently apply for the wetland restoration funds already. So there's continuity there as well.
Okay.
So, and then just to clarify the attachments here, so we have the 3 watersheds. So we have a specific exhibit showing this, and these are consistent with those hydrologic unicodes that I was referring to. So this is Exhibit A. The next item is the fee structure, and we're keeping the same sub-watersheds that we had over the past 15 years. So we have 7 watersheds, fee in lieu of areas. Yeah, stay there. So we have the lower Fox on the bottom right, the upper Fox in the middle, Nippersink Creek east and west. Then we have the Kishwaukee River, Piscasauce Creek, and Coon Creek. The fee structure, we updated, we have it broken down by land cost and restoration cost. So the land cost, we use the federal multiplier. There's a calculator that they provide to go from 2010 rates to 2025 rates. So that's in the middle chart. And then we use restoration costs that are based on the cost that the Village of Algonquin has pretty consistently been using for their projects throughout their village. And so it's based on real information, and this is basically what it would cost us if we were to have to hire somebody to go out and do the restoration. And so it's much more realistic as to the cost of replacing the wetland functions. So I do provide a breakdown of what was provided to us by the Village of Algonquin, so that should be clear. And then we added the land cost, the restoration cost, to get the fees for the different fee in lieu of boundaries.
So that middle table is what would be posted. We
Yeah,
just added
exactly.
the other two for how we would clean that up.
Essentially doubles most of them.
Correct.
Carolyn?
Are we planning on, because this is a big jump from the 2010 to now, and we've got projects coming in that are half of what we've got if we had this up. Are we gonna do this every year then? Update the chart?
That's definitely a discussion amongst you that if you want to do that, we can, or we can kind of look at it on a 5-year cycle or, every couple of years. It's just hard to know kind of how things are going to jump in a couple of years.
I'd say we probably wouldn't need to do it every year, but if property values go up or down, that might be a prompt to revisit it, but you can revisit it at any time.
Anybody else, any other questions? Okay. You're all done with this one?
Yep, I think so.
All right, so I don't know about everybody, but we have a motion on the floor to approve this and move it forward. So the next step for this would be then to the P&D, Planning and Environment Committee. So I go through that committee before the board floor?
Well,
Or just the
because
commission?
there's costs associated, I actually don't know with this WRF. It is just codified and discusses that the MCSC kind of has sole responsibility. So I'm actually not 100% sure if it does need to go all the way through, because it's this committee that controls through the SMO. But I know all budgetary items do go to PED, so we can do that.
In the past, I thought we've always, when we've made changes, I thought it always went to your committee, Larry.
Yeah, I don't remember.
But,
There's no harm to have it come to the committee.
and then
I
move it
mean,
to the
half of
floor
us are
for.
sitting here now.
To the full, well, my question is the full fund to the full board. I mean, if we skip the committee, I'm okay, but if you want to.
No, but before it goes to the board, it should go to the committee.
Right, so, because this is dollars.
Yeah.
That's been my general thumb is anything related with money should go to PED. Now, whether or not it goes to committee of the whole after that.
Right, Carl?
Well, it will if somebody pulls it, but
If you do that going to P&E, you can stop off at the state's attorney first and get those answers.
If you have those questions.
I can ask and give you.
yeah, I mean, you can
Just
ask
get an
it in a general way, but each person that comes and asks us for the money is gonna be a little different anyway. So that's when the state's attorney could review it
Right.
at that point.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
So,
Just preventing the questions when it comes to that committee, because they'd be coming up again.
Okay, I'm gonna
That's the
call,
way
I'm
I'd explain it if it comes around.
gonna call the question myself, let's just vote on this and move forward.
Okay, bring it to me,
Okay,
please.
we'll do is, Tracy Van Bergen,
Yes.
Larry Smith.
Yes?
Carl Kaminsky.
Yes.
John Collins is there, Carolyn Campbell.
Yes.
Okay, Keela Dutton,
Yes.
Abigail Wilgren.
Yes.
We're trying, Ross Perret.
Palareki, yes.
Palareki.
There you go.
Sorry.
So you look.
I gotta apologize.
It's all right.
sometimes 'cause I can never
You're not
get
the
it right.
first, Jim.
Chris T.
Yes.
And I'll say yes, so we'll move it forward to the,
Can I ask a quick question, Jim?
what?
Do you guys want all the red line in there, or do you want it cleaned up when it goes to PED? What do you guys,
Leave the red line, please.
leave the red line? Okay.
different set of eyes.
right? I'm saying that because I'm chairman of PED, in case you guys didn't know that. That's why I get my 2 cents in.
Okay, I think we're down to 5-4.
Yes.
I'm not gonna take a motion on this yet, because it's
Okay.
discussion we may not do anything on.
You want me to go through it?
Yep.
Okay, so this is in relation to 3 general permits. So what I tried to do for you guys was give you kind of the full section and label different things. So hopefully I guided you, because there's a couple of things going on here in the SMO. Where I started with is the section that starts and discusses all the different general permits. These are meant to be very straightforward permits that match a lot of the IDNR and Army Corps requirements, where IDNR puts up a list of specifications to people saying, hey, if you follow this set of instructions or requirements, you don't need to come in and get a permit for us. That's the intent of this, along with a couple of other kind of McHenry County specific components that we wanted to add. So it's meant to streamline the process from that perspective, that if you can meet the requirements in these GP1s, you should be able to meet Army Corps and IDNR. And we do have a specific document that folks sign that basically acknowledges that statement. So it's to Chris's earlier point about a one-stop shop. We don't have people going to IDNR and Army Corps anymore. So in addition to that, so I highlighted the 3 that we're going to be talking about, which is the maintenance of existing roads and bridges, minor modification of culverts, and dredging. So in addition to that, there is some maintenance language that comes before this section. And the reason why this came up was because some of the maintenance language contradicted directly with the permitting language. So it was basically saying the same thing. So to lead you guys through this, I'm gonna go through the general permits first to give you an idea what the changes are. Then I'll talk about the exemptions, and then there's some definitions that are related through that. So I tried to circle, where the maintenance of existing roads and bridges starts. So that's going to be on page 21 of your packet, leading into page 22. Let me follow along on the screen here. So what we did was, and this was a conversation that I had with McHenry County DOT, and I attended several Township Highway Commissioners meetings for this one. And what we decided to do was really limit the maintenance, number 1, to rehabilitative maintenance, which is milling and overlaying that does not increase the impervious area and does not increase the surface elevation. So the intent there is that this would be for flood hazard areas where we don't want to increase elevations in the floodplain. So that's what this permit would allow you to do. If you are going to do more than that, then you can't come in for this. This permit would not qualify. You would go under a minor public road development permit if you're one of those organizations. The in-kind replacement of the existing bridge, that was just clarifying some language there. So the items that are struck out here in terms of resurfacing outside flood hazard areas, flood prone areas, etc. Basically that was just a little too much for some of the townships to keep track of. So what we wanted to do was include a portion for them to allow the county to review their projects, and that's going to show up in the later section. So I will tie that back in.
Wait, allow the county to do what?
So the crux of the issue was that when we have townships that are on the west side of the county, their roadways they don't have the ability to mill and overlay because of the subsurface conditions of some of these roads. They're on,
Okay.
Right. And so the intended purpose from a safety.
My question is, the county oversight?
No, the county doesn't have oversight. The idea here is to allow anyone.
I didn't hear. I just wanted to repeat what you said because I did not hear it.
The townships would have the ability to approach the county to review those areas where they want to provide maintenance.
Okay. That's all
All we're looking for is to make sure it's not in a flood hazard area and that it's not potentially some kind of impact. What this did was limit them to these resurfacing areas. And so we want to be able to give them the opportunity for those roadway areas, if they want to put another 4 inches on top to provide longevity and safety, that they can do that. The rub is we don't want to add necessarily a lot of fill in floodplain areas. And so we wanted to give them an opportunity to come into us before they go out. So they go out and they pay through the NFT tax. It goes and gets approved through MCDOT. So we wanted to be involved in their planning process early on and not throw in other requirements, because by the time it goes to MCDOT, they basically allocated those funds. Now, in conversations with them, if they have a professional engineer that's looked at that, some of the bigger McHenry, Nunda, Algonquin that have those opportunities, that's fine, that's okay, somebody's looked at it. For those that don't, it's just an opportunity for them to get clearance from us. What we found is sometimes they move forward with a project and potentially then find themselves that, hey, this is outside the realm of maintenance, and now they're needing to do additional repairs and modifications. So at the meeting, they all agreed that if they take that step and they don't come to us for that review and they don't have a professional engineer, that if it is a problem that they needed a permit, that then they will have to deal with the consequences of whatever, modifications are needed post that development that required the permit.
Okay. And so this has been presented to the road commissioners board?
Correct.
The committee that they have?
Correct. And that's what they said. And I was okay with it. It was just a way to offer up a way for them to feel good that they don't have to worry about permitting, that we've looked at it. Basically,
Okay.
The responsibility would fall on the county at that point.
Okay.
So just continuing here through the general permits, the next one for the culverts is on page 24. It's just removing it's cleaning it up to remove the need for any calculations by a professional engineer, with the idea that this is replacements, and you're maintaining 90 to 125% of the existing diameter of the pipes. Which when you're going from like 12 inch to 15 inch, you're right at that level. So it's not like this is going to give someone an opportunity to double up a pipe and have concerns now that it's going to lead to flooding. So it was just eliminating that professional engineer criteria. That seems unnecessary there. The last one then is the dredging on page 26 of your packets. So this one, again, cleaned up to try to work in a manner. So number 5 there, I'll just start there. We struck that one. We tried to kind of locate where that had come from. We couldn't find that, so we just took that requirement out. We also tried to clean up the soil erosion control component. We understand that a lot of this is done by the ag community. So they're pulling, material out, kind of letting it dry, and then feathering it into their fields. So we tried to clean that up just to indicate that if you end up producing a large enough stockpile, that potentially we look at providing erosion control measures if necessary there.
With that, item 4, you also struck out that the stockpile cannot be located in the flood hazard area. So by striking that out, essentially you're saying the farmer can put a stockpile for 7 days in a flood hazard area, in my opinion.
Well,
which is filling the floodplain, which if they're gonna start feathering it out and stuff, I mean, it allows for that opportunity of floodplain and flood hazard areas to be filled more easily by mistake, I think.
Yes, I think the problem though is that in a lot of these cases, the farm fields extend into the floodplain, and depending on when they're doing the work, there's just not a feasible manner to take it and put it another 1,000 feet, 500 feet out of the floodplain in potentially a cropped area that hasn't been harvested. So from a constructability perspective, they're gonna do that anyway. And so it's just trying to work with them to acknowledge that, okay, as long as it's temporary, and that if you need the erosion control measures in place to take that out, that fill material is already coming from the floodplain, so it's not like it's an introduction of new material into the floodplain. So that was the concept behind it, is trying to work together in understanding just the process and feasibility of some of this.
And these have all been discussed in the TAC committee.
Yeah, no, yes,
They've hashed this out for you.
This went through the text, so the 100 cubic yards, that was something that, you know, we took out as part of that, because maybe something smaller could be an issue for erosion control as well. And so this was, what we didn't want was to put stockpiles, you pull it out of one ditch and then you place it into another ditch. So that was the idea of the non-obstructive flood flow. So hopefully, you know, if it is in a floodplain area, it's not leaving the site and then it gets dispersed when they have that opportunity to do so. But that was the idea behind it.
I don't have issues in the farm side. I think though, when we have communities where there's a lot of floodplains, it opens the door for that. And on some, you know, where oh, it's a stockpile. Yeah, I'm just putting it there for a little while. I mean, we have issues all the time. And like I said, I understand you're dredging a ditch out in the middle of a farm field. You don't want to haul it the other side of the field, but on the suburban side of things, I think it opens the door a little more. At least that's just my opinion, but
I do think
it's hard to have it's difficult at times to have an item that covers everything, you know?
Absolutely.
And this might be one, but.
I do think you get cover under item 3, because it talks about spoil materials being spread thinly and incorporated into cultivated areas. So obviously on a residential lot, if it's not cultivated, it doesn't really meet that condition. So I think there is coverage for you guys to point that out, that if in the permit they're supposed to haul it away because they have no cultivated areas, unless, you know, they go through, again, if they're gonna keep it, then they don't qualify for this, they're gonna be under a minor development permit, have to do the count storage, get the professional engineer and all of that, so.
Sure, but I guess it says temporary stockpiles remain in place for more than 7 days. It doesn't say they have to be removed by a certain amount of time either. So I guess all I'm getting at is if you have a small pocket flood hazard area in your neighborhood and somebody's building a house, or, you know, oh yeah, I'm gonna get to it, and it's, I put my silt fence around it, I stabilized it, it's gonna be there more than 7 days. Well, how long? And I agree there's the stormwater permit side of it, but I think it just, I don't know. I'm just some thoughts I had, that's all. We'll deal with
It's
it
fair.
either way.
It's fair.
Would that not apply though, because this is only dredging? Like single family wouldn't dredge, right?
True. Well, yeah, that's true.
I don't know, it just, you know, if you come across that situation, I think you're well within your right to place some conditions on what that temporary language is, given the severity of the situation and location. You know, if it's an area that's prone to flooding, then, you know, obviously, yes, I would say we probably don't want temporary stockpiles in those areas at that time.
Because you didn't take this out anywhere else, right? It's just this section? for
No,
dredging
yeah,
only?
we cleaned up.
Yeah, so I think I would go off of that,
We
yeah.
cleaned up the dredging definitions as well. So I'll get to that point, but.
Sure.
Yeah, you know, our kind of TAC mantra is if we can get to 90% of the situations, there's always gonna be some that fall through the cracks, and, you know, those special cases, there's enough language in the SMO built in for the enforcement officer to make some of those considerations, given the circumstantial, you know, where the property is located or whatever it might be.
Okay,
So just moving along, like I said, what I tried to do next was jump you into the exempted development of the ordinance in terms of the structure of how I presented the sheets here for you. This would be coming before the general permits. So the three that we're discussing here are covered under maintenance of existing roads and trails and other maintenance activities. So then I went to those, I included the sections of the definitions portions of the SMO to show you what that looks like. So this is where I was getting into maintenance of existing roads and trails. This idea that it's outside of flood hazard areas, and it has been reviewed and approved by a professional engineer or McHenry County Planning and Development. The problem with the language that we struck out is that the townships previously had number C to rely on where they wanted to, in those conditions, where they wanted to overlay more on some of those poor roads. They were only allowed to go up to 2 inches. So the idea behind this is to just remove that burden. If they need to go more from longevity, the funds they have available from the safety of the roads, they can now do that, and we would basically just take a look at it to give them confidence again, a thumbs up. So there's no more of this, you're only allowed up to 2 inches and it's called maintenance. Now it's just, let's just take a look at it. And if it's a really poor road and you need to add 5 inches, please go ahead and do that. Because we obviously understand from stormwater perspective, there's more in play here. There's safety of the roads and all of that to consider. So we don't want to put conditions that are going to make it harder for them to meet some of those other components that are maybe just as important or more important, obviously, when we're talking about safety. So that's how the definition is now changed. So in order for it to be maintenance where you don't need to come into a permit, it has to be outside of the flood hazard area. And again, we would prefer that the township come and talk to us. If they don't, again, they're okay with the idea that if we get a call, we come out and tell them you should have gotten a permit, and this would be for any municipalities if you're working as well, that hey, you needed a permit and now you need to put in a culvert or whatever the revision might be that they would have to deal with that. So that was what they agreed on. So we did not make it mandatory, we were just making it self-reporting, but it was at least an avenue for them to use if they so choose. So moving along to other maintenance activity then. I apologize if you're still able to follow, great. If not, I don't blame you. Laying this out for you is, yeah. So number E deals with the culvert replacement. So again, it was just to clean it up. Of if you're replacing in kind outside of the flood hazard area, just go ahead and make that change. Is all this really does. The maintenance of drainage ditches and the whole dredging component. So before I talk about G, we struck all of H because we didn't really see a situation where you wouldn't be talking about flood hazard area if you're dredging a pond. Should we just remove that out of the maintenance altogether? For G, what we did was we removed the word dredging and we left it as removal of obstructive, invasive, dead, or dying vegetation. So outside of the floodway, provided any spoiled materials are removed from the floodplain hazard area. So what that is meant to do is basically you're not trying to move any sediment, but we understand that you can have some brush and some things like that get in there, part of landscaping potentially. We don't want to get in the way of that type of maintenance. So we cleaned that one up, and then we did, I did add a caveat that we did revise dredging to be specific to the accumulation of silt and sediment. So we removed that other debris component, moved that over to to maintenance to try to provide a little bit more clarity. And that was something that obviously we had a lot of input from our ag TAC members. So hopefully I didn't lose all of you through that marathon. It probably seemed like a marathon. And I can, go back and summarize anything for anyone. Or if you wanted to, I think on the agenda we listed these all individually. We did, so it does give you the ability if you wanted to poll anyone for anything, send back to the TAC or any more information and approve the others, do that. But
Anybody have any particular areas like possibly the dredging or anything that you have concerns about? I know you talked about that. There's a chance to read through it, as that's what you're trying to do. Tracy? They have a hard copy of that if you want to look at that.
Good.
These are hard copies, it makes it a lot easier.
I will ask a question. So getting to what Chris was talking about, so we have dredging. We obviously do have pond areas that are more in urban or college areas where their potential for that could be pulled out and left there longer due to the idea that we are allowing in cultivated areas a little bit more leeway. Is there a way to clarify that then?
I don't know, because also in dredging operations, when you're talking about the removal, people like to dry them out as well. And if you have a private property that's fully in the floodplain, where do I tell them to put it? So that's the other problem, is I don't know if we can get more specific, just due to that, the nature of, if you've got a small property owner that has a pond, and we do see that from time to time, and it's completely in a flood hazard area, I don't know where potentially they have the opportunity to move it and let it dry outside of that flood hazard area. So, and then that's where I was saying, like, if it's a little bit more of a gray area, we tend to put those type of stipulations on the plans, just to be clear that the material will be hauled off. And we asked them to show the potential location of where they're gonna be stockpiling for that reason. Now, they draw it one place on the plan, it ends up in another location anyway. So we just end up dealing with it regardless, and I don't think any amount of language is really gonna
change that, right?
Fix that, yeah. So we did, like I said, we tried to get to a point where at least it's clear, concise, it makes sense, gives enforcement officers the flexibility, and contractors a little bit of flexibility too. And usually the good ones understand. So even if it's not in that location, maybe it's a better location that they're aware of, they put up their silt fence and they do their job. And there's examples that don't do that as well.
Okay, Tracy?
Could you re-explain the dredging of ponds and as where that would go?
So the dredging of ponds, you would be getting a general permit for dredging. So the conflict previously was, hey, this says you need to get a permit for dredging your pond, and then there's this exemption that says you don't need to get a permit for dredging your pond. So we looked at the two, and the way we tried to parse it out was, is it a flood hazard area? We felt that we'd rather have permits for dredging involving flood hazard areas. So if it's a ditch, and a flood hazard area means floodplain, flood prone, those type of things. The pond situation, the TAC felt that there's very little ponds that would be outside of the realm of like flood hazard. So we just thought it would be important to just eliminate that. We couldn't find a middle ground of, well, when would you be able to dredge a pond without a permit type of thing? Whereas, and that goes for most of the dredging that you're gonna be doing in ditches. But and that's why we changed that definition for maintenance of drainage ditches, that you can go in and clean out the brush and the vegetation and debris, if you will, but when you get the backhoe and now you're starting to move sediment, that was kind of the line that, we wanted to draw. And, a drainage ditch is basically a flood hazard area as well. So it was just being consistent with that. We looked at it, well, we should just remove ponds completely. So we came to that consent.
So if I want to clean up my pond, I need to get a general permit number 1.
If you are dredging where you're bringing out sediment.
Bringing out what?
Sediment, silt, accumulated dirt, things like that. If you are maintaining it from a perspective that you are looking, you've got invasives or something like that, and you want to cut those down and, branches, dead debris has fallen over, you just want to go in and kind of scoop out that material, then that's a little bit different than actual sediment that's been
So I don't need a permit to take my willow tree branches out of my pond?
No.
Okay, good.
That was the idea, yes, Larry, that was the idea. We wanted to make it specific to sediments and accumulation of sediments.
Okay, so if you have no objections, any of you, I'd entertain a motion to move these forward. Is that, you're looking for this to move forward?
Yeah.
The TAC committee didn't want it to come back, right?
The TAC doesn't want it to come back, but obviously, if it does, it's because there's a concern to address. And
We kind of kicked this one back once before, I think, part of it. So they're addressed that issue that you had in the past.
And I don't know if I ever brought it to you guys. I think maybe I brought it up in a report just to kind of keep you abreast of what we're working on in tax, so you kind of know what's coming, so that if there's any feedback you want to provide, we can avoid this back and forth. And that's kind of what I tried to do. So some of this might seem familiar. It's probably because of the fact I've been kind of keeping you guys up to speed to take that feedback back.
So I'll entertain a motion to move this one forward.
Second.
You're seconded?
Mm-hmm.
Carl's motion, give me a second, Ross gives you a second. Okay. I don't need a roll call on this one. All those in favor?
Yeah.
Opposed? Okay, move that one forward. 5.5, discussion approve as runoff volume. 5.5, let's talk about that one.
Okay. This is also one that might seem familiar that I've brought up before. It's basically a whole rewrite of what used to be item 6, runoff volume reduction hierarchy, and item 7, water quality protection. In our discussion, we just felt that those basically went hand in hand. You can't talk about one without the other, really. So what we decided to do was look at some of the other ordinances, and a lot of the other ordinances talk about these from a post-construction best management practices approach, PCBFPs. So largely what we looked at was when will these be required, and we started with other ordinances that basically had hard line thresholds for an impervious area coverage or some kind of number that when you calculate it for your development site, you're triggering a post-construction BMP. The problem with that, one ordinance was that these were being triggered on single-family residential lots that just made them really hard to be incorporated. Part of our discussion was, the Act Community example of a gravel drive to a barn, pole barn that's used for equipment for harvesting that, it isn't a high traffic area. If we have an impervious threshold, are they not required to do a BMP for something that maybe isn't really a concern? So what we decided to do was move more towards a narrative approach of requesting the applicants to identify what their development is, what they're using it for, to help us make the determination of whether or not there would be a concern for a potential pollutant, long-term pollutant. So section A discusses the description. We give kind of a list of activities to help people. So is this a high traffic area? Is it commercial? Is it industrial? Is it outdoor storage? Are they gonna be bringing in materials from offsite, storing different items? Is it a dump site? Is it salt storage, fuel storage? Is it an agricultural use? And if so, are you already meeting NRCS, USDA standards, type of thing? Is it a maintenance facility? So that's just to give kind of a brief list for people to think about as they describe their narrative. And then what we have as number 2 is the list of pollutants, or at least the ones that we've determined that would be the ones we want to look at currently. Total suspended solids, so that's related to your erosion and other things that would cause solids to accumulate. It could be from vehicles that can have stuff that drop off the bottom of their cars, leaks from those vehicles related to metals and oils, and then any type of nutrients consisting of nitrogen or phosphorus, or if you're a landscaping company and you're storing these chemicals or this material, is it stored properly? Is it meeting certain requirements from, again, U.S. Department of Ag or NRCS or whatever it might be? So it's identification of these, and we did provide a table on the next page for you that lists. So hopefully this table is the guide. So on the left-hand side, we have the pollutant source that would be coming from some of these different activities, identification of the pollutant, and some of the options. These options aren't limited to this. It's just these are the options that we know has approved literature. There's guidelines, there's requirements. So anyone that's doing a design can have access to this. And a lot of these are pulled from the Illinois Urban Manual, which is a collection of all the different soil and water conservation districts in Illinois. So they've come together and said, if you're gonna do, for example, a vegetated strip, it has to be a certain size, there's a certain amount of tributary area that goes to it for it to be effective, type of thing. What we're also looking for, and this criteria would not apply to those general permits that we discussed, as well as the general permit 2, which is for a single family residence. So this is for any minor development, intermediate, major development, and for the major development, we included that essentially we would like to see infiltration as part of that design for your post-construction BMP. Essentially the recorded maintenance plan that goes along with that. If the applicant can demonstrate that the development does not generate any of these, then they're good. So it's kind of similar to conditional use permits that we have, where people come in, they put together what they're gonna do, you guys consider it. We would be taking the same approach for this. So there's the table there. I don't want to run through all of these. You guys have them in front of you, but most of these activities are just general in nature. So we're looking at high traffic areas, gas station service areas, industrial processes, yard waste. We get a lot of conditional use permits for landscape businesses that do outdoor storage. Sometimes they end up next to a ditch or a creek. They're storing materials, whether it's fertilizer, gravel, stone, topsoil. Sometimes we see, operations where they're doing a lot of wood chipping. So you have large piles of wood chipping going on. This wouldn't go after existing folks. This would just be for newer folks that are coming in. Something that we felt that we want to try to keep an eye on. So that's the big change that we have here. We do have a hierarchy, so the design requirements, there is a hierarchy. There is a couple of specifics that we threw in there that we thought is going to be important. One of those is infiltration designs shall utilize a sediment forebay or similar BMP to remove sediments or fine particles. And then dry bottom detention basins shall have a bottom minimum slope of 1.5%. What we see a lot of the times is flat bottoms. They just turn into mud pits. The vegetation's never established. They just turned into sinks of all kinds of components, lead to erosion. So that's where that criteria is coming from. So that's kind of the big change to basically our water quality section of the county. Is we're moving from these threshold ideas to now a more of a narrative design where it allows people flexibility to address these concerns in a variety of different manners and not, and especially in situations where it doesn't make sense to have a BMP. So like the pole barn idea where the farmer needs a pole barn for his equipment, and that's all he's doing is just storing equipment for harvesting in his operation. If it's a large enough pole barn, under some of the other ordinances, they would want that BMP in place. Where we're looking at it as, what is the potential pollutant that is of concern there? If it's the roof structure, that should be relatively, low concerns there. And then obviously the farm equipment is just doing normal operation activities. So that was the driver, is to give that flexibility and eliminate kind of more burden than may be required and really identify the projects that would be of concern.
Just a quick question. On item A6, it says a recorded maintenance plan for any proposed PCBMP. What is what's the expectation or what's the thought behind when you say recorded? Do you just mean a documented, or are you saying like recorded something? I'm just wondering what the thought is behind that.
The SMO requires you to record a maintenance plan with the recorder's office. So it's a document just that indicates what are the items that you have as part of your system, and what's the maintenance? Are you doing it on a quarterly basis? Are you doing it, how often are you doing it? So, this will segue into a future, I know it's not part of it, but I think it's appropriate to bring it up for you guys. What we're looking to do is, there's no municipality or jurisdiction right now that looks at long-term maintenance. What we're seeing is a lot of the infrastructure that's built 40, 50 years ago is failing, it's no longer working. And a lot of that onus comes on, and the municipalities are well aware of that with some of their SSA areas, and we've touched on this previously. What we'd like to do is this kind of be the first foundational piece. We're also waiting for the IEPA to come out with their MS4 to see how that's going to change, so we might need to incorporate some more components to this. But essentially, our responsibility is to make sure that we're keeping our water clean. Maintenance is a huge part of that. Our watershed planning we're looking to do, if we're going to fund these projects, we need long-term maintenance. So what we would like to propose in the future is, when these are recorded with tax help, is to kind of develop some simple items that property owners, if they're looking to incorporate some of this design, to be able to submit to us on an annual basis to make sure they're keeping up with their maintenance. If they're not, then we would look at it as a violation, because now it's a modification to that original system. So if your basin fills up with silt due to lack of maintenance, you've lost volume, it's a modification of that original permit. And so we would look at it as a potential violation. We haven't worked out, obviously, all of that, and we don't know. Right now we're working on getting there, being able to do that with current staff, because obviously keeping track of maintenance is going to be a huge task. So that's why we haven't done this, but that is one of the things that we're thinking about long term, is moving towards a situation where we can do that. And so now when people come in and propose a design with a detention basin or things like that, it's gonna have a little bit more responsibility on their part. So maybe they really wanna think about an alternative design to that with maintenance and long-term maintenance in mind.
Well, one other thing, so recording it is, the importance of that is, property owner A is not gonna own that property in perpetuity. So when property owner sells to property owner B, we don't want that maintenance requirement to be lost. And so by having the maintenance plan recorded, then that transfers to the next property owner, and then they have that guidance. That's obviously a big problem with these types of things, is conveying that information from property owner to property owner as it transfers.
For the small ponds. Not for the subdivision ponds, but for the small ponds, so it impacts, yeah, I get it.
Come on up, Adam.
All right.
Adam, that leads to my question is, and four of us from PED are sitting here, and Adam's the director of planning development, environment and development at the county. So how much of this should go through our committee or not through our committee? I mean, are we gonna have somebody on the board for say, we didn't follow procedure because it didn't go through one of the standing committees? I mean, I don't wanna make my meeting longer.
I got you. A lot of the stuff in here, in terms of maintenance, some of it, I'll say it this way, is gonna be required already. But in terms of us enacting it and following, will we get accused? Is that what your question is? Will we get accused, if you will, of us not
following procedure by not having it
procedure
go through a standing committee?
I don't recognize that yet. And we've talked about that quite a bit in terms of, how these amendments would kind of get brought up and how these procedures would get brought up. As we look ahead, we see the MS4 permit intensifying and some of these other maintenance requirements really becoming central to the successes of projects that we want to go forward. So brick grants and some of the other grants that would be available as we look at our other long-term goals. Maintenance and how we're going to actually demonstrate that's going to be critical. So, as we're talking here about staff and what oversight measures would be in place, one of the supplemental requests we're going to have going forward to the county board is going to be a software package that's currently implemented with McDOT that maintains their assets. Cartograph is the name of that. We would be looking to adhere and modify that system to suit the needs that the SMO would require and then what the MS4 permits will require in the future. So it's something that, as these things come through, I think PED will have some involvement with all of it, but maybe not total involvement with everything.
Okay. No, and I think this is good stuff, like this procedure part of it, and this will have to go to the board to be approved at some point, right?
Correct.
So when we see the resolution on the board floor, is it gonna say it's went through the Stormwater Commission and not a standing committee? Or, some people on the board are sort of picky about that procedural situation.
Yeah, I don't believe, I don't have a clear answer for you, I guess,
Okay,
from the
we don't need a clear answer
SMO.
today.
If, in terms of the amendments and what that looks like in its totality.
Okay, and I don't need a clear, an answer on that
I got
today. Just give it some thought. If it's gonna make it easier when it gets to the board floor is all, whether we do or don't.
Yeah, I liken the procedure to the zoning process, and so PED sees it up front. That's where, for the SMO, it's more TAC and MCSC will see all those up front. PED and ZBA would see zoning amendments. So this will go through, once it goes to the county board, it would go through, and it may come back from PED right to this group. But that, I'll brush up on that procedure.
Okay, that's fine, thanks.
Yeah, for sure.
So, so the MS4, so the requirements, so are you using Cartograph to kind of like identify and label where all these things are, where these improvements have been made? And then, because I think that the whole idea where you have these areas, special service areas, is the paying for it and making sure that that money is going to be available. And I think the cities have the same problem within their HOAs in terms of maintaining some of that stuff. And I know that the idea of floating around a district, like a special service area district, where they would pay into it to make sure that money is available, I don't know if that's ever been considered, but I guess I'm just, I'm always thinking about how do you know over time that these will be maintained?
That's the idea, Carolyn. We're looking to have these in a computerized system so that we can print reports easily, and it can give us a heads up whether or not someone has submitted their report. And we can easily then send out a notification. That's a template letter, for example, like, hey, we haven't provided your annual report to us to confirm you're maintaining that. That's where we want to go. I don't know if we're going to get there, I'll be honest with you, because part of the thing that we're going to need to figure out and tack, well, number one, staff is still working through what that's going to look like to see, like, are we going to need more staff, or are we going to be good where we're at with some of the services that, like, McDOT is using. But we also don't want it to become something that it's not executable. So we want to make sure that it's items that any homeowner that wants to do this can succeed and achieve, and you're not going to get, a review from 10 different people with 10 different answers potentially. So, and we understand that it could lead to a situation of disagreement where the owner thinks they're taking care of it and maintaining it, and we're saying no. If it can't be clear for us, then we might not be able to really do it. So that's why it's not in here. It's just holding status quo of recording the maintenance plan so that it carries over. And, one of the situations we get all the time is a downstream neighbor is complaining about an upstream neighbor. When it does involve maintenance, their only relief is to try to use the Illinois drainage law to help them out if they are having drainage concerns or even potential drainage impacts related to lack of maintenance. And then, as I mentioned, if we're going to go through this watershed planning process, which to your point, those are the type of things we're going to discuss and look at to see, do we want to try to come up with, and others have. We do have a list of items that other communities have done to try to create funds for these type of purposes. But very simply, what we were going to do is try to first figure out, can we come up with a simple list, simple way that the person can achieve it, and have that come into us, be reviewed, approved, and if not, send notification as to why, so that if we did open a violation, it would be assessing a fee to that person, like, hey, you're not maintaining it, there's a fee, and we're hoping that when you assess a fee to someone, that will be motivation for them to take care of that, lack of maintenance or whatever it is that they need. So as I mentioned, I didn't want to bring it up, but kind of Chris's point, and it felt appropriate in terms of maintenance that I touch on it, but that's not going to be part of this initial step that we're looking to take. So this kind of builds our foundation, and then we're looking to see if we can build on that. It's also unclear with the MS4 requirements if that's going to push us in that direction anyway. So we thought we'd have this like a year and a half ago, 2 years, and every time it's on this person's desk, it's on that person's desk. So we're anticipating that it's coming soon, and we're going to see and work that in. And so we're hoping that our incorporation into Cartograph that McDOT uses is also going to help us meet some of those MS4 needs. So it's not just maintenance. So, yeah, we're looking to get into a more digital age and have technology help us become more efficient.
Any other questions? Okay. So I guess I'll ask for a general consent or concession if you guys want to take action on 5.5 after they've explained everything?
Yes.
So Larry, is that a motion to approve 5.5?
Yeah.
Move forward. Carl seconds that. All those in favor? Or any discussion further or disagreement? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, 5.5, move forward. Number 6, discussion item, possible action. Article 6, Section B,
Correct.
page 38.
Yeah, it starts on 36. Yeah, page 36 of your packet. I'm just highlighting the problem areas within the SMO. It's something that we've touched on previously, but so this is related to one of the previous amendments written into the ordinance. It directly is when you have a development that is upstream of a neighbor, what is the requirement for that detention basin? With the idea being that potentially you've got, let's say, 100 acres that are now being concentrated and funneled into a single area that now discharges to that point. And so in the previous amendment, what was done was it required for that developer to take a look and make sure that that stormwater can be conveyed safely through that property up to a point that's designated to accept stormwater. So that could be a creek, that could be a ditch, that could be a culvert underneath a roadway. It can be a number of those different things that are meant to take and flow. And the developer would have to take it from that point A all the way to that point B. That could mean that you're going through multiple properties, could mean, maybe one property. It just depends on the situation. So item number 7 there discusses about notification to those downstream properties. Number 8, again, talks about notification to drainage districts, any that might be in the area. And then number 9 talks about those discharges with the preference to connecting to existing drain tile where possible. Any surface discharge tile connection shall be as a secondary low flow outlet. You have to make sure that there's hydraulic capacity for that. And then it goes into the stormwater management facility discharging onto the adjoining property, and this idea of creating an offsite outfall, which would mean that the adjoining property doesn't have something dedicated for that water, so now there is a measure that's needed, whether it's a ditch, a swale, or an underground pipe to convey it safely through that property owner. So those first kind of A, B, and C talk about the calculations and the requirements for that. One of the components that is required is to deed restrict that area. So that would be, for example, if you're doing a pipe through that property, you would deed restrict that pipe. So maybe a 10-foot easement, 5 on each side from pipe center, for example, just to give you guys a visual. Item D then discusses if the downstream owner refuses and doesn't want those improvements. That basically the applicant shall provide the enforcement officer with a 2-year post-development security for the engineer's estimates with a 10% contingency. And then there's this 2-year period following completion of the development where if the downstream improvements occur, the enforcement officer can release the security for the payment of that infrastructure. This is a current situation we're facing, and the problem is the language of the security makes it hard to execute, and also we're talking about private property owners. So something I've touched on in the previous discussions was that basically this is a procedure where me as the enforcement officer would be holding funds for work on private property. And the idea here is that the downstream owner would also be responsible for the work, and I would be reimbursing them for that work. Okay, so that aside, what I tried to do for you guys to kind of clean it up was give you a visual graphic here. I suck at graphics, it was very basic, box and arrows, that I presented to the TAC, and at TAC level, there was agreement on it, and we decided to send it up here first from a conceptual perspective, and then, you know, continue to put effort into a lot of the details. And some of this stems from kind of what we've learned from the current situation. So the first portion would be that the applicant engineer is, you know, just like in the original conditions, they're gonna determine if there's adequate downstream capacity. So even if there is a ditch or a swale, maybe it needs to be widened. If there isn't, one needs to be provided. So essentially, this is just basically saying yes or no, does it exist? And the analysis shows that it's safe to keep sending water through it. So that's the first step. The second step is if those downstream improvements are required, to develop a little bit of a hierarchy. So the first part of that would be infiltration. If the current, if the design can accommodate infiltration on site, then theoretically that water is never really leaving the property to affect the downstream owner. Number two would be a separate pipe, and number three would be an overland ditch slash swale. The reason why we didn't put existing pipe is due to just the unknown nature of potential tying into existing drain tiles with unknown laterals and maybe just some of the circumstances. We also learned from our one of our main drain tile installers in the area that's been doing it for 30 years, or they say they've been doing it for 30 years, that most times they would actually prefer to come in and just drop in a new pipe right next to the existing one. They feel that it's just cleaner, easier, and cheaper to do that instead of digging up the existing and dealing with all that hassle. So that's why we were saying separate pipe here. But again, existing pipe could be added to the hierarchy. This isn't complete. So once that's established, that the engineer kind of goes through and says we can't do infiltration, sure, we can do it via pipe, or yeah, we can also ditch it. Then P&D staff would be responsible for doing the outreach with the downstream owner. One of the problems we've had is the ordinance puts that onus on the applicant, and we've just gotten mixed responses, and we're not really sure what's been communicated and what hasn't. So we want P&D staff to be responsible for that communication process. That way we're certain that the downstream owner is getting the correct information, the correct design, and, you know, sometimes that information can get lost between the two owners working it out. So that gives us more security that we're getting the right info out. We would request feedback from that owner. We would review that feedback and then share it with the applicant and engineer for potential adjustments. It's not we do want to stress that it's not an opportunity to put the downstream owner in a position where they make demands. Obviously, we want to try to avoid that. So that's where the hierarchy is supposed to help to kind of determine the feasibility. If there's a couple of feasible options available, then sure, that's where the hierarchy in that ranking would help kind of break the tie. Unless the owner, you know, the downstream owner really prefers something lower on the hierarchy, then we could make that consideration and the engineer can provide that instead. So we do want that input, obviously, from that downstream owner, but we don't want to put them in a position of power to make demands and potentially impact development otherwise. The next step would be that the final changes are approved and added to the permit. Notification is then sent to the downstream owner, who can request the downstream improvements within the timeframe of the permit. So the idea would be that everything is agreed upon, the permit is put in place. So the downstream owner is either agreeing to it, which then the upstream owner would come in and facilitate that work, or if the downstream owner prefers a certain, contractor and the upstream owner agrees to their estimate, then they can, however they want to work that out. But essentially, it would put the permit in place now where all the work is clear, it's agreed upon. And if if it's not agreed upon because the downstream owner just doesn't want anything, that's where, again, we would try to use the hierarchy and the feasibility to determine which one is better. So instead of then requiring the upstream owner to get a security, we would just issue the permit with the condition that the downstream improvements would only begin if the downstream owner requests it within that, again, it can be a 2-year period, just like it's stated. So this is meant to eliminate the county from kind of controlling any money. And it still puts the same ideas in place. Where the downstream owner can't stop development, he would still have the opportunity to request the improvements within a 2-year process. But it would eliminate the county or anyone having to go out to that downstream owner and have to get additional information where they can stall it or try to use that to request and take advantage of that situation. So then the last part, if the request for the downstream improvements is not received within, so this is just an example, within 6 months of the expiration of the permit can be closed if all improvements and stabilization is completed. So that time frame expires, then those downstream improvements would never get approved. And that's kind of in a nutshell how it would all flow and replace the security bond idea.
So if there was no feasible way for the downstream owner to be happy with this, then, and there was nothing that the developer could do to retention ponds or whatever on his own property, is at some point does it get to where, hey, this development doesn't work, we're not going to give you a permit for it?
Well, so in general, we don't want neighbors to be able to stop development if it meets all requirements of the SMO. But we understand that if a detention basin is placed in a certain location and it collects a lot of water, it could be an issue. So we would want to present some solutions to that. But obviously, if the homeowner is hell-bent on saying no, or the downstream neighbor is hell-bent on saying no, then, and that was the idea behind the security bond, was that the previous TAC and MCSC group didn't want development, didn't want like one downstream owner to be able to stop development from happening, even if it met all requirements. So this would not stop that, and that's where some of the details, for example, when we send out notification, we'll have a deadline. So zoning does this, Army Corps does this, IDNR does this. They send out for, 30-day public comment period. So it would be based on that same structure. If the downstream owner doesn't reply at all, and obviously we would make every attempt and make sure that he's received the notifications. If they don't want to participate at all, then yes, the process would move without them. And so this hierarchy would be critical in determining then, because yeah, the design would move forward with the idea that we would do a pipe, and where is the placement of that pipe from point A to point B through that person's property. That hierarchy will come with some specifications. Maybe it's trying to stay on the outside if possible. It's trying to, avoid certain components. That's where that downstream owner would be able to come in and give some feedback. Like, hey, you're put, I like the idea, but how you're showing it, can we reroute the pipe this way? We would then probably ask the engineer to take a look at that and say, the only feasible solution is this route or that route because of gravity. Water can't flow upstream.
So I get that. I just think
I
hell-bent no guy. And if there's no other way whatsoever, then the permit get denied.
No, because we would put together a design that would work, and that owner would, that hell no guy would have an opportunity to come in and say, you know what, I was wrong, I do want those improvements. They're already gonna be permitted, so it's not like we need to now, because that's the other problem with the security bond, is I'm also holding a security on a permit that doesn't exist, and usually that's how you tie those together. So that's one of the other components that make it hard to execute currently. So you wouldn't have that issue, it's already permitted. We just wanna make sure that if the person changes their mind, it's not so late on the back end of the permit that makes it unreasonable for the developer, to then be like, oh, now you're telling me, now I gotta come back and mobilize and it's gonna be more expensive. So those are some of the details, obviously, we have to get in here. But yeah, that person that says no, we would still give them that opportunity. Are they gonna be happy with it? Probably not.
Yeah, okay,
So-
that makes sense. Yeah, it's gonna be designed to work whether that downstream guy plays along or not, but he does have an option after the fact and by
Correct.
this way, so I think that's,
Right, and that deed restriction and easement agreement, we're gonna look at having language that people would agree to. Most people don't wanna go anything down on a plat of survey, so those are some of the details we're gonna look at to make it amenable to both parties.
I was saying, doesn't Illinois drainage law though have some, like to your point, Illinois drainage law, you can't, if you're downstream, you have to accept the water. At that point, it's coming onto your property. And whatever you do with it on your property, and that's where the developer maybe can assist with that, and, it has to leave your property at the same spot. So, I don't,
Yes.
in a nutshell, Illinois drainage law is you gotta take the water that's always been coming to your property, you gotta let it go off your property where it always has to. How you deal with it on your property, that's up to you. You can't dam it up at your property line and not allow it to come onto you. So if the developer, that's where the stormwater is going. Now granted, when the detention pond's released, it's a little bit more of a consistent flow, so maybe the grass is a little wetter and those types of issues. But, at the end of the day, Illinois drainage law kind of dictates that, I'm sorry, you have to accept that water.
But doesn't Illinois drainage law also say you can't increase
Correct, you can't
the
increase
rate?
the
So if
rate.
you've got a development
The flow.
that's increasing the rate, the person that's the no guy doesn't necessarily have to take that increase.
One of the examples is subdivisions that go up next to ag communities. So there might be multiple discharge points to the ag site that now are concentrated between one or two. And there's no argument that saying, yes, I accept the water, but now those low flow events are causing loss of crop area. And so to Tracy's point, from the Illinois drainage law, one could argue that is now impacting their ability because they can show a direct financial impact to that. And so again, as a committee and as a county, we could look at that and say, well, that's tough luck, you gotta deal with that. This is kind of meant to help with those situations that would be causing that issue.
Sure, and on the vice versa though, I've had it where you have a subdivision that is right next to a farm and when there's crops on the field, there's no runoff. And then the minute he harvests, people's backyards are just getting flooded out with, all kinds of stuff. And you try to go to the farmer, he's like, no, I'm covered. I'm allowed to do, I'm allowed to harvest. I don't have to put to stabilize it and everything. So then, it puts the city in between. To a certain extent, it puts the city in between a property owner dispute. You have to, there's some civil side of that too. I guess it is a complicated issue, but that's why I just asked what, the drainage law. I would think some of this is covered under that.
Well, and I certainly wasn't a part of the discussions on when, this was implemented, but I will say that, Kane County, a lot of the ordinances are kind of following this idea. So if we were to strike this, we would be reverting back to what we had previously, I believe. Not that versed in what the ordinance looked like before. But yeah, you know, this is kind of the way that it went to try to help alleviate those needs. I think, you know, one consideration from city perspective and county perspective, from a service perspective, is do we want to hang people up on Illinois drainage law, which is expensive for lawyers to get involved and those type of things. So outside of stormwater, obviously, as public service provider, you know, that those are tough conversations that I have to have with folks sometimes. And there are scenarios where unfortunately it is just a civil matter. And so in some of these cases, if someone's coming into doing development, you know, I think it does make sense to, you know, to have this approach, but obviously I do want to clean it up a little bit and provide an avenue for the downstream owner to feel like they're a part of that discussion when otherwise they might be neglected.
And the reason, the original intent of this, and there was the unintended consequence of the downstream owner who objected to this, and then the bonding issue. The original intent of this wasn't be out in the farm community runoff or like it was the major developments tying into the field tiles that did not have the capacity, and then it would blow out all their tiles and damage the farm. And one of the examples that in Huntley we always use, and that's under Kane County, is the Harmony School out there, Harmony Road School. Across the street through that farm, it created a stream. In any amount of rain, there's a stream there for days and weeks. And because they can't handle the runoff the way it was. And originally, they had forced that pipe to go all the way down to handle that, it would have, I mean, it basically has destroyed that property.
Thank you for.
So that was the original intent of that. Not that particular property, but that's an example.
It's a perfect example, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And even though that wasn't McHenry County, we couldn't handle that. But Kane County did not have that in place at that time.
And I think that's why we, again, are focusing on a separate pipe instead of tying into the existing. Again, we can have that as a hierarchical structure that can receive analysis if that's the preference of the downstream owner. And we can take that into consideration. At some point, you know, you can, even though it might be the correct design and everything, if the person just doesn't want to go with it, you know, how much pushing can we actually do?
So I'm going to ask, in your opinion or your thoughts, because you've had to put a lot of time in thinking about this one.
Yeah.
Are there any, after this patch, are there any unintended consequences possibly that you see?
Well, with this patch, you know, this is meant to keep the core ideas of working with the downstream owner, doing the capacity analysis, doing all of that. But this is meant to eliminate the whole bond idea and really streamline it into a permit. Because the other issue with the 2-year time frame is it says when the development is completed. That could take some time if that upstream owner sees issues, and that downstream owner could start to see the you know, the consequences a lot sooner than that development being done. So this is meant to eliminate the difficulty of execution of a security. And I will say that when this was taken, a lot of it was taken from King County, and when I spoke to King County, their intention is to actually have the county collect the money and be responsible for accessing and doing the work. And so that obviously is a lot different than how we would want to use that. And so it really just eliminates all of that and some of the concerns related to giving too much power to the downstream owner. Because if we're having to go and get, any type of sign-offs or things like that, they can try to use that as a negotiating tool or as a demand tool, to try to get components out of it that they want that are in excess to what would be required of that, downstream pipe.
So obviously, it hasn't been very long ago that we put that one in with that requirement.
Yes.
And obviously, we found a problem with it. If this one goes in place, the same goes if we find there's a problem with it, causing holdup in projects and everything. With what, like Larry was saying, the downstream owner is saying, using it as a weapon to try to stop the development, which they will, somebody will, then.
But I like this process, don't get me wrong, and I certainly do not have a better suggestion.
No, that's
So I'm
a
comfortable
problem.
Well, appreciate it, yes.
This was belabored.
Yes, I get it, and, so I'm comfortable with it, and I do see that there could be issues, but I absolutely do not have a better suggestion, so.
Right. And, this is something that I don't necessarily want to send it to committee, to you guys, to look at all the time. So I'd rather just, have the process in place. And I think, to your point of unintended consequences, I think we're going to end up at some point coming across a situation with an unhappy downstream neighbor. I don't necessarily think it's going to be due to the process. I think it's just going to potentially be due to them just not wanting any development, or it's not the right type of development that they're looking for. Stuff that the ZBA faces when you're talking about zoning changes and that everybody faces. I think it's gonna be along those lines. I don't think it's gonna be anything in excess of that nobody hasn't seen in any of those other scenarios. In my opinion, but,
Tracy?
if I had a crystal ball, I'd certainly.
When does the 2-year?
That's something up for discussion. I think we were thinking that it would start when the permit is issued on day one. So what that would allow is if the downstream owner is on board and it makes sense to do it simultaneously and it's cheaper to try to do that. If you wait for the end of the development or something along those lines, then economically it might not make sense. And so this allows the people that are on board from day one to get it in. And then the person that's not, we can throw some caveats on that, obviously. I think that we would probably want to see construction started within that 6-month window, something along those lines. If there's delays in construction and that downstream neighbor isn't sure, they're kind of waiting.
That's where I'm
going
with it.
We'd have to get those details sorted out and provide some of those guide rails.
Okay.
Or unforeseen conditions that may change the scope. So I mean, that's kind of why it's open for discussion too, is leaving a little bit of latitude so that it's any period during construction, maybe, and then a period after, so that the owners can see it. We talked about seasonal ups and downs. 2 years is probably a good enough window that you can offer somebody that's already kind of being a holdout on something. There's still an opportunity to get there.
In the economic downturns, we have a lot of subdivisions out there that never got completed, and if they did all the movement that caused the water to move, and if they haven't completed that project, so.
Right, and I think in some of those circumstances, we'd probably, as part of those guidelines, take into consideration the technicalities of these projects. If it is absolutely required to have those downstream improvements before some certain components come up, that's where those conditions would be part of that. So that conversation with the downstream owner, if they're a holdout, we will do our effort to let them know, if you wait, here's some of the potential impacts behind this. As soon as you say go, that developer is gonna have to be ready to move forward as part of that. a lot of details, a lot of legal components still into it, so it's just kind of the general flow of trying to move through the process, and now we're gonna try, again, put some of those details in place and brainstorm it.
Right.
And there's probably gonna be a lot of discussion on some of those hurdles that are gonna come up and how we can get over those.
Carolyn, you had a,
Yeah, I found it, because we talked about the bonding, but so in, what is this? 11, I can't even tell you what page it's on, under the basic requirements, 11D, D, the off-site is required to be constructed, and it talks about, it gets in there, a probable construction cost plus 10% contingency. Who is that going to then?
Well, so the way that this is written, our interpretation, we had the state's attorney look at that.
Yeah.
That would be going to me to hold as the
So we are
enforcement
still
officer.
doing that, because something was said earlier that we were getting away from that. Am I missing something?
We have a current situation.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
familiar with that situation. So, but is that what we're gonna maintain, is how do you have that money available in 2 years? If-
Gotcha. So instead of having money available for, a design that isn't permitted, it's gonna become part of the permit. So once it becomes part of the permit, that developer needs to construct it. So there's no need for a probable cost at that point, because they're on the hook to construct it as part of their permit requirements.
But if in 2 years, the downstream property owner does not want it, then the enforcement code officer can send it back to the developer.
Well, I wouldn't collect money at that point, because what would
Okay.
happen is the developer is on the hook.
So they have to hold that money back in case.
It would be up to them,
Up to
right?
them to
Yeah, it would be
figure out
up
to
to
do that.
them. They
Okay.
have it on retainer, they have it available. And because we issue the permit, they would be on the hook for that work. But the condition would be that the downstream owner has to provide some type of document, legal document that we would receive
Right.
that initiates that work. If we never receive that, then that developer wouldn't have to be.
Okay, so when you're looking at rewording this in that 2-year, understanding that there could be some construction issues or whatever, the language would have to allow for, okay, if it's not 2 years, but maybe it's longer, something that allows for that to happen.
Yeah, I think what it would look like is it would have the caveat of 2 years from the start of the permit, when the permit is issued, or a 2-year period from the start of construction if there's a delay or, something along those lines, yeah. So there would be kind of an and/or allowing both. So if there is a downturn, they don't start, it's a 3-year permit, they don't start until year 2, which potentially might mean that they need a permit extension, then it would start at that year 2 because construction didn't start within, maybe the first 3 months of that permit issuance date. So something along those lines, yeah.
so if they extended their permit, it automatically extends the bonding too then?
It would extend, there's no bond, so it would extend the time frame that the downstream owner has the ability.
Right.
The
Yeah,
eligibility period.
yeah, that's a good
It
use.
would automatically extend that.
Yes, that eligibility
So they get
period,
the project done in 3 years.
absolutely, right.
I think that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's good.
And that's a good term, eligibility period. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm gonna steal that.
Okay, now we're done patting ourselves on the back here. Now, come on, guys. Let's, is there any other questions on this, or you have any more you want to discuss on this one?
I got an answer for you, Larry, too.
Okay.
So I looked at, I know the SMO, it's kind of generic, but this commission will hold a public hearing. So we'll publish it, this, to, again, liken it to the zoning process, this would be the ZBA. So we would publish that, have that out, and then it would go to the county board. So it would go through PED at the subsequent subcommittee meeting.
It would?
It would, yes. And I say that, there's nothing that talks about that in the amendments, but I looked at the last 3 amendments that we've done, and they all went through PED.
Okay, well, thanks, and then I'll just figure you'll take care of that.
Yep, you got it.
you're right, it did go through a hearing, public hearing, the original one, years ago. How
Yeah,
long ago was the original one? 10,
well, the original one,
15?
well, we had a big set in 14 and another one in 16. And then with our latest was in 22. In July, September, were those couple meetings, sets.
Okay, so if everybody's satisfied with moving this forward?
Well, you don't have to move anything forward, I'm gonna bring it back. I
You're gonna
just
bring this one
wanted
back.
to, yeah, I just wanted to get the feedback, really,
The
so.
tech needs us to see
So,
us again.
right, so I just wanted to get the feedback to make sure we're on the right direction, and that's kind of how the TAC felt, because we were starting to get into those weeds to a lot of the questions you guys were asking, and I was like, okay, guys, let's pause. Let's see, let's make sure that the committee is comfortable with the direction we're going in, and then we'll start adding those details in, and, you know, we'll bring it back to you. Or if I have an opportunity where we've made some progress, you know, share what that looks like. Again, just more opportunities for you to provide feedback as we continue through the process to just.
Okay, that's a good point. Okay. Where are we else there? We're down to reports now, aren't we?
One more, or a couple reports there.
Okay,
So this one is very early on. I don't have anything to share, but it came from Chairman Von Bergen requesting a look at the stormwater storage requirements that we have in place. So we are taking a look at that. I presented something to the TAC the last meeting, I think it was March, related to this. So what I wanted to show you guys is the two areas that we're working on. So number one is the stormwater storage requirements. We're looking at the impervious threshold. So a lot of the other counties have about a half acre. We're at 20,000, which is right at that half acre. So that's not really what we're hung up on. What we're looking to do, though, is change some of this easement language. So for example, the language of a conservation easement, it's really not a conservation easement, so we want to clean that up. What we might do is just go to a 10% exemption anyway for properties. I think the big thing that the TAC agreed on, though, is to have an analysis done by an engineer. And what we were looking to demonstrate, or I was presenting on a very technical aspect, is I highlighted then Part B on page 41 and 41, the allowable release rates. These are very restrictive release rates. This is what's used to basically determine how much flow can be released from your site. What we learned was that these stem from actually sanitary requirements back in the day that municipalities faced in order to get their permitting. They just seem to carry that over to stormwater. So one of the items here when we're looking at it is that these release rates are almost, you know, and sometimes 90% reduction on the original release rates. We also don't have a method that it goes from release rates straight into detention basins. So we don't have a way of acknowledging the use of other type of components such as like native gardens, native vegetations to try to offset some of that impervious area. And so what we're looking at is trying to change the way that we are reviewing these and analyzing these to hopefully allow other avenues instead of a detention basin. Maybe the person the farmer can farm something else or use something else to offset that impervious. We don't have anything currently in the ordinance that does that. And we're looking at potentially revising those release rates so that you're not over designing these large detention basins, primarily on large properties where the development might be somewhere in the middle and you have a long flow path before it leaves the site. You know, the change between existing and proposed flows might be very minimal in that perspective. So that's kind of what we're looking at is to actually kind of do a big rewrite in that area, if you will, due to some of the things and some of the analysis that we're looking at. So I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions to that currently, but it was just an update. It's an ongoing process. So once we feel comfortable, we'll let you know. I think some of the hurdles right now from some of the engineering side is that they feel that they can potentially manipulate some of the criteria to fit kind of where we're trying to go. So I think what we're looking to do to kind of counter that is provide some specifics on how to use some of the calculations so that they can't be manipulated, or it's going to be very hard or very obvious that there's a manipulation going on to try to avoid that. But we do like the idea of trying to reduce peak flows instead of trying to go to this 90% reduction, which some of the counter arguments have been that, potentially, we don't want to be overburdensome where we're trying to make up for the sins of the past by just doing this, large reduction, just because we know that potentially it's going to, put us in a better direction moving forward. But at the same time, be flexible with some of these alternative designs and things like that we know would not be concern for, for future flooding risks potentially. So trying to balance those two. So I don't know if there's any feedback that, any questions from anyone, but that's.
They're easy today.
The only comment I would have with that is when you're looking at your allowable release rates, you should consider the minimum orifice size that the ordinance has too. It's like it says minimum orifice size, I think is like 4 inches or something.
Right.
Half the time on some of the smaller developments, the orifice should be smaller, and so then once again, you're looking at this difference in, well, you're not meeting the release rate, which, but I'm just saying maybe you use that as a basis if you're gonna have your minimum orifice size as a 4 inch, well, that's your basis then, and you can start looking at anything about that.
Yeah, certainly, and I think that's part of the problem with some of this detention design is your allowable release rate becomes so small because of the project area that, is how much of a downstream concern is it? And that's where that engineering analysis should hopefully come into play to demonstrate that. So it would either alleviate the need or, a farmer or developer or anyone on their property that's looking to expand might be able to not have to tear up their property to dig a large hole. Maybe there's some other components that they can take advantage of, so. Yes, definitely. It's all. So I highlighted these, but yes, it could lead into other sections of the SMO depending on the direction that we go, so.
Okay, Tracy?
Is there, I guess, a list of, we talk about impervious, but a lot of complaints that I get, all impervious aren't created equal. Whereas if, I'll just use our farm as an example, we've got gravel driveways in our parking area. Now that's considered impervious. So I could potentially pave those down the road and it would still be considered impervious, but I think a lot of people feel that gravel would not create as big of a problem as an impervious surface as pavement. I mean, do we consider some of that? I think I heard at one point sand was considered impervious.
We do. We do in the calculation efforts to identify that pavement is going to sheet flow water off faster than gravel or anything that might, not be smooth. So that is quantified. So from a site that potentially uses concrete to gravel, the flows there are going to be lower than the gravel side. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to, and that's part of the concern of the engineer, is trying to use some of those factors to fabricate some of these flows. So I'm gonna show, you know, a type of gravel, depending on the gravel that's used or the sub-base, et cetera, that's used, to show that my flow rates are lower and potentially meet a certain requirement. Part of what we're trying to do is develop McHenry County tables to say, if you're using gravel, here's your coefficient. If you're using pavement, here's your coefficient. So for your gravel areas, your coefficients are gonna be smaller, which are gonna lead to smaller flows. So your design maybe needs to account for less of an area of whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's the tension or, you know, et cetera, than you would if you wanted to pave it. Or even go to, you know, the paver design might act differently altogether than gravel. But yeah, we are looking to incorporate that use. It's already is done in calculations that's factored in, but there's nothing out there that says then that like a native area would offset a gravel area potentially, right? So we're looking to analyze that and see if we can take advantage of some of that and see where that threshold is. Do we cut it off at gravel? Do we want to give some specifics on how that gravel is done? Are there fines in it? Is it compacted? Those type of things. So yes and no, I guess.
Okay, and going from gravel to pavement, is there a permit process in between there?
No. So yeah, so currently from a detention threshold, we do look at gravel as an impervious surface. When we don't is when the person can demonstrate that the water can get through that subsurface. It's not compacted. You're not putting it on then compacted clay underneath, where we would call that more like dead storage. The water gets in there once, and because of that clay layer, it's not really going to move, so it sheet flows off like if it was, you know, a regular paved surface almost, or a water surface at that point.
So if in their engineer plans, they can demonstrate those things. Right now, do we not have the flexibility?
We do.
Or we do?
Mm-hmm. We do. That's something that I work with people on
Okay.
all the time, and it might just be as simple as showing a couple of, you know, borings and showing what that subsurface looks like. We also have the ability for people to, if there is clay, to potentially replace a component of that clay, so now it kind of bridges through that clay. So you could then consider those impervious areas as pervious essentially, because the water is still infiltrating down, it's not leaving the site. So we do have that flexibility. It's not straightforward and clear, I will say that,
Okay.
when you're reading it, right? You're shaking your head.
And
Right, so,
yeah,
that's kind of what we're trying to clean up to provide that and potentially look at, and again, we're not there yet, but we're trying to get there to see, okay, what hurdles remain, bring it back to you guys to indicate, here's the hurdles that we have that we're dealing with that we just can't overcome, and maybe this is what we have to settle on. And we're looking to change it. I hope that we can get there, but if there's too many hurdles that make it difficult, then we might face a reality where we can't and have to settle with something else.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, watershed. Okay. We're in the process where we're hoping we're going to have a structure for our watershed planning in terms of clear direction of, you know, PM, who's doing what, sub-consultants, all that stuff. We're hoping to get some numbers down, some actual values that we don't want to bring up yet. And even when we have them, I think we're going to have to think internally if we, you know, want to present them or bring them up, or maybe it's just kind of introduction to you guys to see what that looks like. But we're getting close. We feel good about it. Some of the federal sources of funding obviously are currently frozen under current conditions, so we don't know what that's going to look like. We also are in the process of finalizing an outreach tool to give people an online opportunity to enter in comments that they might have related to flooding or water quality, erosion, whatever, that we can start to compile as a database as part of our watershed planning. So that's kind of the latest there, so.
Okay,
Just
Carolyn?
does that, is this being done in connection like with other like watersheds that plans that are in process right now? I think this doesn't include Creek, Evelyn, or.
Good question, yeah, we are going to be reaching out to all of those, if it's a jurisdiction, municipality, or entities that have planning, have done planning, or currently have any kind of analysis that might help our watershed planning. We don't want to duplicate efforts. So what we're thinking that might look like is if we've got watersheds that already have some plans, then a lot of that legwork is already done, and it's about just referencing those or using the information there, or approaching them and asking them to allow us to use that information so that we can focus resources on other watersheds where really nothing has been done yet. But I think the main point is that we want to develop kind of an equal across the board matrix or method to how we want to do things, and then use that information to see kind of which of those items we can check off, so we're not duplicating that effort.
It's also going to be good because when you go out for funding, you have to have that shovel-ready project, and you don't know what that is unless you have your plan. And if we coordinate throughout the whole county, then you can actually prioritize which plans or which projects are closer to getting off the ground. And then if we have all that information, I think that would be helpful for everybody.
That's actually one of the principal reasons for doing this, and kind of using Algonquin as a model, because they have been so effective, and Crystal Lake has been doing this as well. Having these projects and being able to go after funds as they become available. I had mentioned, Algonquin, they have a major storm now. They're not worried about flooding because all these projects that were identified in the Woods Creek plan have been implemented. And so we really would like to see that countywide. Make it as easy as possible for the municipalities, townships, and other partners to have these projects proactively identified, have all the data needed to prepare and submit these grant applications, and hop on it and get these things accomplished in the county. The precipitation, the storm intensity is increasing. How are we going to mitigate flooding in the county? This is going to be the best way for us to do it. And to clarify, part of the reason for this 3 watersheds in the Wetland Restoration Fund is also because this is the approach that we're going to be taking here in the county. Instead of doing it sub-watershed by sub-watershed, we're going to break the county into 3 main watersheds, and we still want to get down to the same level of detail that you would with the sub-watershed plan, but we can achieve a tremendous economy of scale by doing this on a bigger scale. In the Fox River watershed, we have a lot of watershed plans that have been developed, so a lot of the legwork is done. It'll make it much easier to implement that. The Nipperson Creek watershed already has a watershed plan for the entire watershed. So it's just going to be a matter of updating it. The Kishwaukee River watershed, there are only 2 small plans done for sub-watersheds, so there's a lot more work to do there. So our focus will be initially on the Kishwaukee River watershed, and then we'll go out from there. But ideally, we'll have 3 main watershed plans for the county. These have to be updated every 10 years. Once they're in place, it's just a matter of kind of updating the projects and making any refinements based on land changes over that 10-year period. So the cost of updating these things is going to be minimal, and the level of effort will be minimal. Once it's accomplished, it really will be a self-sustaining way of managing watershed planning. So that's kind of the big picture behind all this.
And we're hoping, that a lot of our municipalities join in, and probably in some of those sub-watersheds where they exist, they'll probably be some of the main leaders in that. And then in the areas that, are more rural, that, we provide some structure to those areas that they can create their own, watershed group to consider which projects they want to move forward with and all of that. So still a lot to do, and as it develops, we'll provide more information and feedback, so.
Is that part of our future topics?
It's always a future topic, let's just put it that way.
Any other future topics that you want to talk about?
I don't think so. I think Scott just wanted to touch on a couple of events that we have coming up. A couple are partnered with Lake County, so if you guys don't mind, we just kind of want to share those.
All right.
And this applies more to the municipalities and townships, but we are collaborating with Lake County to do region-wide programming and to really empower our municipalities and others. The first thing that's coming up is we have a stormwater best management practice field day coming up next Wednesday. And so this is a collaborative effort with Lake County, SMC, and McHenry County, working with the International Erosion Control Association. And this really is a great program because we're going to have stations set up showing, focusing on different types of stormwater best management practices. We'll be have experts demonstrating how to properly install these things, the types of issues that are common with the best management practices, and then how to inspect them. And once again, this is why it really is important for municipalities to be participating in this, because you're getting firsthand training on the entire facet of the stormwater best management practices. There is a $175 fee to this, but we're going to be doing this every 2 years is the plan. But this really is important for municipalities to take advantage of, and it's really a unique opportunity to get a high level of training. The next item is with all the changes going on with wetland jurisdiction, we're going to have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers provide an update on the regulations, and this does affect us because any wetlands that are no longer under the Army Corps of Engineers authority, it's now under the county jurisdiction. So we are expecting to have an increased workload as far as addressing isolated waters of McHenry County. And so we'll be able to get firsthand information directly from the Army Corps of Engineers. And this is a free event. It's going to be held right here. This is Wednesday, April 30th. And it's free and open to the public from 10 to 11:30 on Wednesday, April 30th.
Just ask that you register if you don't mind. So if you need the link, we've sent it out to most of our municipalities. So if you haven't gotten that, just reach out to us, or if you have someone come call and just let us know. But we would prefer to. We don't know what the numbers are, so we want to keep an eye on that prior to.
What time is that?
That is 10 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. on Wednesday, April 30th. And I did want to emphasize with the Stormwater BMP Field Day, that's basically a day-long event next Wednesday, April 23rd. If you, to make it easy to register, just send me an email with the staff that you want to participate, the names and the emails that's needed for the certificates that they get. But you can just email me a list of the people you want to send, and I'll work with the International Erosion Control Association to create a single invoice. I'm really not happy with their website and the registration process. So to make it as easy as possible, all you have to do is email me the names and the emails of the people you want to have participate. But we really would like to see strong participation from McHenry County. Right now, we're getting a lot more from Lake County than McHenry County. And I guess this will go for the last one too. We're going to have an MS4 pollution prevention workshop that we're going to be doing annually with Lake County. So our first one is going to be Wednesday, May 21st from 9 a.m. to noon. Registration starts at 8. This will be held at the Lake County Central Permit Facility. We're probably going to alternate between holding it in Lake County and McHenry County every year. This really is important because we at some point we are going to get the new MS4. The last we've heard from the IEPA is likely a June 1st effective date for the new MS4. Our featured speaker is going to be one of the senior staff from the IEPA, and they're going to be talking about updates to the MS4 program and then the audit process. So we all get audited at some point, and so we'll be hearing directly from the people responsible for initiating the audits on what to expect. Then we'll also have presentations on good housekeeping and pollution prevention, providing details of how to do that. And once again, that's really important. I've been working with MS4 for several years, and I still feel I've got a lot more to learn. So this is just a great opportunity. This is free and open to the public. You've got in-person or Zoom option, and we're also going to be representing our DOT, and Lake County DOT are going to be providing case studies of things that they've done to reduce fluoride pollution. So we really have a great program lined up. I'll be sending out email reminders on all of these, but you know, a lot of effort goes into doing these types of programs, especially working collaboratively with Lake County. So we really want to see McHenry County properly represented at these events as well. So that's my pitch, and I'll be following up by email with all these information on these events as the dates get closer. But next week is the first one, and really would like to see greater representation from McHenry County. Thanks.
We're in strategic planning that day.
I was gonna say, we're going on the
All day.
23rd.
Yeah.
So, for this round, so.
Just,
So municipalities will have to carry the load.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
All right, thank you.
with no further, entertain a motion to adjourn. Larry moves, Carl seconds, all those in favor?